we get started. So thank you guys for joining us today. So today we will be speaking about how nurses can really help in driving innovation in healthcare. And we have the amazing Rebecca Love with us. I came across her TEDx video and I was so impressed, not only in how well she speaks about healthcare innovation, but also just how much she's contributed. Really, I found the talk very motivational. So, I thought it'd be great to have her speak to our nursing community here. So just a bit about Rebecca Love. So currently she's VP at OptimizeRX. She's also president of SONSIEL, which is the Society of Nurse Scientists, Innovators, Entrepreneurs, and Leaders. She was the first director of nurse innovation and entrepreneurship in the US. And she founded HireNurses.com in 2013, which she later ended up selling off. She currently sits on the board of NextGen Ventures and is a member of the board of advisors for the World Healthcare Congress Europe. And so just incredibly impressed by all that you've achieved. So before we get started with Rebecca, I would like Fabio to just talk a little bit about Rome and just explain to the audience who we are. So Fabio?
Thank you very much, Pooja. So yes, hi, thank you everyone for joining us today. That's a pleasure. It's a pleasure for us hosting Rebecca, which is an inspirational woman and colleague. And here at Rome, we're trying to achieve and deal a lot of problems related to the shortage of healthcare in the UK. So we actually want to help the NHS and the private hospital organization as well to fulfill all the vacancies that every day they have to deal with, because this is a huge problem, national problem that we've been speaking about with as well Donna last 2 weeks ago. And we want to actually help the system improving the service by cutting down agency cost and providing the right staff for the manager to work with. In summary, we are delighted that we are going to be live this month, and we can pilot our system next month within different hospitals in London. And then we're gonna look as well a partner like Rebecca maybe that can help us expand overseas. So I would like to let Rebecca now take over, because she is the main guest, and she has a lot to say about how nurses can improve the system by just challenging themselves and challenging the system itself.
Fabio and Pooja, thank you so much for having me. It's such a delight. And I always enjoy coming on and speaking with other nurses who have challenged the status quo, started their companies, and see the world differently in the way that they can do that. And we're not going to spend a lot of time. I'll tell you guys a little bit about my history. We'll talk about the history of nurse innovation. But more importantly, what I want to do is I want to understand where you're going and your thoughts processes are, and how we can basically transform the future of healthcare through nursing-led innovation. So if we start back at the beginning, this is the year of the nurse, 200 years of nursing history. And that was all started back in 1854, when basically Florence Nightingale was on the front lines of the Crimean War. And at that time, there was people that was, all of the patients that she was treating, they found out they were dying more from the disease that seemed to follow the physician from the bedside to the bedside to the bedside, as he did not wash his hands nor sterilize his medical equipment. Now, why that is important is because fundamentally, medicine at that time did not believe that if you could not see it, it did not exist. And therefore, germs were simply a figment of one's imagination. And fundamentally, it was nursing that challenged medicine to make sure that they understood the value of understanding research and science and challenging what we currently believe to transform it. And in my opinion, Florence Nightingale was the ultimate innovator. She basically challenged the status quo to save patients' lives. And from what I've seen throughout history of nursing in the last 200 years, nurses have constantly innovated to save patients' lives. That's what we've done. And Fabio is an example of some of those stories that see problems and create solutions. But historically, nurses haven't been given those platforms to do that very, very well. And if I tell you a little bit about my story, It really started with, at the time, I was a professor at a community college. And in the United States, we have several different types of degrees. We have things called LPN degrees, which is a 1-year nursing degree. We have a RN degree, which is a 2-year nursing degree. And then we have what's called a BSN, which is a 4-year degree. And I taught an associate degree 2-year program within the United States. And in Boston, which is one of the leading centers of hospitals in the world, our students really struggled to find nursing jobs upon graduation, which just seems counterintuitive because we know that there's a massive nursing shortage. Some things that in statistics you guys may want to know. In the United States, we have 4 million nurses in the United States, which we graduate 250,000 nurses a year. But compared to the UK, which has a total population of about 450,000 nurses, and we have a 10 times that population. But in the United States, we lose about 50% of our new nursing graduates every 2 years. That's the app from the bedside. That means of those 250,000 graduates, we lose 125,000 of them from the bedside. There's a massive exodus from the profession of nursing, which to me is a major crisis that nobody is talking about. And I don't know, you guys, do you guys have a similar kind of exodus from the profession in the UK? Are you losing as many nurses by the bedside in your experience, or no?
From my experience, yes, but it's more related to the fact that people usually go back to their country because the UK has invested a lot on recruiting people from abroad. And what we've seen, especially after Brexit, was a massive going back to their country. And that, plus the fact that the government hasn't really invested on nursing education, etc., has caused a bigger even gap into the market of healthcare professionals.
I remember Brexit being a major concern of what that was going to do. And I know that your workforce is, I think about 50% is made up of a foreign workforce or an outside of the UK workforce within healthcare for the nursing population, correct? In the United States, we don't see quite the same levels coming in. We do have a significant portion that do. But what we are finding in our situation in the United States is that nurses are facing tremendous burnout in the United States system. And our system is quite different from the UK, that it is not a nationalized healthcare system. And what that means is that we have neither nurse to patient ratios, which I know have been established within the UK, but also because we are a privatized healthcare system, that we are, nurses are incentivized, or healthcare systems are incentivized to treat as many patients as possible to make margins or financial numbers work. As a nurse, fundamentally, this was a new concept for me because when I went to nursing school, nobody ever talked to us about business. Nobody ever talked to us about the business of healthcare, which in the United States, it very much is a business. And it is very much a business in the UK as well. The truth is that you can't have cost vastly outweigh the payments that are coming in, because then you can't support your staff, you can't support your surgeries, you can't support the buildings that they operate. There has to be a balance in which that happens. But in the United States, fundamentally, we're seeing a situation of our nursing workforce, especially in the era of COVID, that are becoming just similar to what's going on in the UK. An incredible amount of downward pressure onto them in terms of the responsibilities that they have, the number of patients that they're treating, and also the inability to backfill and support them for breaks and time off, that we're just having tremendous amounts of breakdown in the system. Now, that being said, when I started hire nurses, similar to Fabio starting, Rome at this time, it was all in the idea of how could you better connect nurses with those who wanted to hire nurses. Because at the time I was a hospice nurse practitioner. In addition to my students not being able to find jobs, I also felt that my hospice nurse patients were ending up in long-term care facilities when they wanted to die at home. We built the platform. We thought everything was going to go very well. As you know, sometimes those could be very challenging. Eventually, we did get acquired by a company in the UK called Rialto. And that was a company that again then was sold about a year ago as well. And it was a very interesting transformation to learn the process of how the US and the UK is very different in terms of their operating. But my experience of basically starting a company was my exploration of the business of healthcare and understanding nurse innovation. And like many of us that were nurses, I was never exposed, as I mentioned, in nursing school to any of those business concepts that are so fundamental to being able to speak the language of business and being acceptable of this. So I went forward and I attended an event called a hackathon. And have you guys ever been to a hackathon? Are you familiar with those? No, hi. You have to attend. They're absolutely brilliant. But they're these events that a good friend of mine who now runs Mass Challenge, or also known as Pulse, which is an initiative set up by the governor of the state of Massachusetts to accelerate healthcare companies forward, said to me, Rebecca, you know what, as starting a company, you need to attend this event. And so it was a 3-day event put on by a hospital system where people came together to put together identified problems that they wanted to solve and then created solution over the course of the weekend. And as I showed up at that event, there was absolutely brilliant people there, the CEO of the hospital system, the heads of all these startups and companies, doctors and engineers and scientists, all in this room. But I was the only nurse there. And I thought to myself, this is where all the decision makers are. I'm not supposed to be here as a nurse. And I don't know if you guys have ever felt that way, but as a nurse, I never felt like I was invited to those meetings. I was often told, hey, you do your tasks, stay in your lane, do what you need to do, because you have a job to save the patient's lives in front of you that you're treating today. I didn't have you come into this role to really change the system or make differences on a large scale. And that's how I constantly felt as a bedside nurse. And I actually went back to school and became an advanced practice nurse, and known as a nurse practitioner. And even in that role as a nurse practitioner, I fundamentally struggled to see that I added value to make substantial changes in the healthcare system in front of us. So over the course of this weekend, what happens transformatively is that you sit in a room all day. I mean, you're 56 hours in, you show back up at 7 in the morning, you leave at midnight, you're back around. But what happens is mentors show up and they walk into the room and they sit down with you. And I remember this one moment when the CEO of the hospital walked in and they asked us what was the problem that we were solving and the solution that we were coming up with. And he said, oh, well, that's no problem. You guys can just implement it this way at the hospital. And I said, well, you know, with due respect, that's not how it works. And he said, what do you mean that's not how it works? And I said, well, nurses are never going to basically implement any kind of process that way because it's going to create more work for us and it doesn't do anything. And he, you know, I remember him looking at me and said, I had no idea. And through the course of the weekend, I had so many interactions that started to make me realize that nurses have such intrinsic value because they understand everything going on at the bedside, but have this 360 worldview of all the pain points of the system in a way that most others who work in healthcare have no idea about. They, by being on the front lines, having to navigate administration and physicians and patients, and also the nursing staff in general, they know where all the breakages are and understand the workflow of which goes on in hospitals. I left that weekend realizing that there had to be a nurse hackathon, because if nurses were given the opportunity to address the problems that they saw in healthcare, we could solve a majority of the problems that we face. Now, there's a term in the United States that we which is called workarounds. Do you guys have that same kind of term in the UK? A workaround? Yeah, okay, great. So in the United States, on average, a nurse does 27 workarounds a shift. That means 27 times a shift, a nurse is going in and making a system that doesn't work well for them work better for them. And usually it doesn't only work better for the nurse, but it actually works better for the patient. And these workarounds, though, however, are well seen in places like Google or Amazon or Apple or Microsoft, where basically you identify a problem, you fix the problem so that it works better for the end user. You're considered a genius, right? You're considered a genius. In nursing, and I don't know if you feel this way, Fabio, but if you are to do a workaround by the bedside in nursing, that's considered a bad thing. And I don't know, does that ring true with you, Fabio, as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It does.
Yeah.
And I felt that so many times during my career, but well, maybe because I'm Italian, so we used to adapt to everything. But yeah, and I think it's a great skill to have when you are a nurse, because you have to deal with sometimes even with life-threatening situation, and you have to adapt your skill to where you have. So yeah.
You have to adapt your skill to where you are, because you have to innovate, because the situation that you're dealing with doesn't have a roadmap to it. So what happens is, in the United States, at least, you would tend to get in trouble. You would be written up for breaking protocol, because in the US, there are two things that we're fundamentally taught, which I think is the basis of most nursing education. One, you don't want to kill a person, and two, you don't want to harm a person. So you're told, follow protocol, follow procedure, stay in your lane. And if you go outside of that, you risk patients' lives. Now that might work 80% of the time. As you know, there's a bell curve in most situations. 80% of most policies are set up because it meets the needs for 80%. But you have these 10% on both outliers of situations that create massive problems and don't work to the situations. So at that time, this was around 2015, I started to study the environment of nurse innovation. And at that time, you look back in historical writings or you look back in nursing journals, there might have been 5 articles, less than a handful of them, that mentioned nurse, innovator, and entrepreneur in the same article. Not one in the same sentence. In 2015, the idea of nursing as innovators largely did not exist. People did not see nursing as innovators. And I remember I started to call around all of these universities around Boston and said, you know what, I really would like there to be a nurse hackathon. And I remember I had the phone hung up on me. I had people say, that's just a fad. Nurses aren't innovators. I don't understand why you think this would be a good idea. Nurses have a specific one. We teach to a licensing board. We teach to a test, which we do so that patients can stay safe. Basically, innovation almost seems contraindicated to a very structured community setting and style and license structure for nursing education. I was lucky, though, to connect with the Dean of Northeastern by the name of Nancy Hanrahan. She had recently left the University of Pennsylvania, which we consider an Ivy League school in the United States, coming on as the director, the new Dean of Nursing at Northeastern, which happened to be my alumni. And I remember I got on this phone call with her, and at the time I was teaching a community college. I had my small startup. I had 3 little kids at home, and I said, you gotta host this nurse hackathon. It changed my life. I felt so empowered. And she said, Rebecca, you know, you went to this hackathon. Why don't you run a hackathon? And I remember in that moment, I knew that this moment was a split-minute decision that I had to make, and it had huge consequences. Now, I had gone to a hackathon, but here I was being asked to lead a hackathon. Not only a hackathon in its true sense, but a hackathon in the nursing vertical that had never been done in the world before. And I remember thinking in that split moment, a moment of hesitation, and to the moment that I said, sure, I'll run that hackathon for you. And over the course of the next year, a team of us came together of volunteers. And I always say, people ask Rebecca, how did you get to where you are today? And I said, my entire life started by volunteering. Because in that moment, if I had said no, and I would not have been introduced to this group of individuals who were innovators and thought leaders and thinkers and people who had made it in their career enough that they had been placed on an advisory board at a university because of the success that they had had in life. Now, I knew where I wanted to go in life. I knew that I wanted to make an impact in healthcare. I wanted to transform the future of nursing because for me, I wanted to empower a profession that had been largely disempowered and not given the runway and the bandwidth to be able to change healthcare. So I stepped into that world, and volunteering for the next year of my life, in addition to all those things going on, running a company, working full-time, 3 little kids, I then signed on for a year commitment in which we launched the first nurse hackathon and we called it actually the Nurse Innovation Entrepreneurship Conference and Hackathon in July 2016. And I spent all of this time building up this. And as I mentioned, there was no one who talked about nurse innovators back at that time. We had no idea if anybody would show up at this event. And 2 weeks before that event happened, we were sold out. We had every major hospital in Boston was sending about 20 of their nurses to attend to hear about this conversation. We had organizations and businesses from around the country sending in representatives to attend. Everybody from Johnson & Johnson to Meditech to, I'm talking BD, Microsoft was coming and attending. The chief nursing officer of Microsoft was coming to speak. There was huge people coming to see what this conversation was about. But fundamentally, underneath it all, everybody was waiting for it to fail. And fundamentally, as a nurse, there's been so many moments, and I'm sure you guys are facing them in your business, that the vast majority of people that you talk to tell you all the reasons why something isn't going to work. Innovation is about believing it will work. It's about seeing those moments in time in history when the status quo needs to be broken so that we can transform the future of healthcare. And it was that weekend when all of a sudden the doors opened and 200 nurses walked in from around the country. And after the conference, the head of the conference came up to me and said, Rebecca, you got to cut this short. These people are tired. I'm not sure this hackathon is going to work. And I stepped on that stage after an 8-hour day that they had been lectured to all day. And I kicked off our hackathon. And suddenly the energy in the room changed. And over the course of that weekend, those 200 nurses stood at all of a sudden, the Friday night kicks off and you let the nurses come up to stage. And suddenly we had a line of 40 nurses lined up and they get 1 minute to stand up and say the problem that they want to solve. And so, hey, I have an IV that constantly breaks and a child bleeds out. I need to redevelop the Luer lock so that I can manage a new Luer lock. Or, hey, I'm getting pressure ulcers from the way that the bed constantly is in a low Fowler's position because this is costing a shearing effect. And I need to tackle that. To the nurses who won our most recent hackathon who said, hey, I spend 50% of my shift in the dark and I have no light. The only way to see the patient is by turning on the light. These problems that are identified to create new solutions over the course of the weekend not only transform the impact and the problems that we deal with in healthcare, but it transforms the way the nurses feel about themselves and what they can accomplish. That nurse hackathon, all of a sudden I got the phone call 2 weeks before that event, and Nancy called me and said, Rebecca, I want you to come on as the first director of innovation and entrepreneurship at the School of Nursing. I said, well, great, Nancy. What program are we going to model? And she said, well, there is no program in the world. We'll just, fly the plane as we build it. And that was my thing. And I want to tell each of you, there are going to be moments in your career that you're going to feel like you are stepping off a cliff into an abyss in which you can either crash to the bottom or you're going to soar into the sky. And every radar system in your body is going to tell you not to do it. It is those moments in time where the butterflies in my stomach start going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, when the voices all around me tell me, do not do what you're going to do, that have been the moments that have transformed my life. I stayed with Northeastern for 2 years. There was a transition that happened. My company became acquired. I went on with Rialto for 2 years to learn more business, because still even at that moment, I had no business skill sets. It was a very steep learning curve to learn business as a nurse. But then after leaving there, I was going for a walk around March 2018, around January. It was a New Year's resolution. It was a freezing day. I live on the coast of a place called Marblehead, which is a beautiful seacoast town that juts out into the Atlantic Ocean. I was walking around the ocean in these subcold temperatures, and all the sun breaks through the clouds. And I realized I have to start an organization that's going to help transform the future of nursing. I have to take nurse innovation and build it to being something bigger than a program at a university. This has to be a global effort, because through those 2 years, I met so many nurses who were part of my people, part of my tribe. They spoke to my soul. They saw the world differently, that I missed them. So at the time, and all of a sudden that sun broke through and the name SONSIEL came to my head. And forever from that point forward, I started to reach out to nurses. And in the United States, we have 800 nursing associations. 800! It's insane how many nursing associations we have in the United States. So I would call my friends up and they'd say, Rebecca, there's 1 million nursing associations. I was like, well, not really 1 million, but there's 800 of them. So yes, I know we have a lot of them. We probably don't need more, but hear me out. We need a nursing organization that focuses on empowering nurses to redefine what's possible for our profession, but not only speak to our profession, but redefine what nurses can do in the world and speak to others. So most of our nursing associations do a great job, but they speak to each other. They speak to policy. We're going to let you work this many hours. Here's the scope of your licensing practice. Here's a new test for your OSCEs, this kind of stuff. But nobody of our nursing professions stops and actually documents the legacy of the impact nurses have made in healthcare and faces that out. And an example I'd like to share is there's the director of global corporate relations at Johnson & Johnson by the name of Linda Benton. She is a good friend of mine, but she tells this story of when she came across J&J became one of our first sponsors at the program that we built at Northeastern. And they developed this amazing video, and if we can, I'll actually end this program with you guys watching it. But it is actually called the documentaries of nurses as extraordinary innovators across history, and we'll watch this. It's a 2-minute video. But she said when they went out trying to find these stories of nurse innovation in 2017, they couldn't find anything. So they had, outside of Florence Nightingale, so they had to hire an expert in the deep web to go out and find these stories. And they finally found them after this expert won. Now they are making a new documentary on the legacy of nursing during the era of COVID to document their stories. And Linda told me a few weeks ago, the difference between 2017 and now in 2020 is I can find numerous examples where organizations, hospital systems, healthcare organizations are sharing the stories of nurse innovators at their systems, developing new protocols, policies, procedures, and programs, and as well as devices to manage this. For example, in the United States, we always had to go in and change the IV pool. It was the nurses who came up with the extension tubing to extend that so that the IV poles could be placed outside of their rooms. The cost of things of we're dealing with patients who were now being prone because they do better in results to breathing with COVID was actually developed by nurses because we could turn patients, and this was counter because usually people with respiratory distress, we want to put them in high Fowlers, right? But people failed on that. We as an organization, as nurses, can innovate so well. Long story short, SONSIEL came together in about a year ago. And we started to transform this. We started to run hackathons. We wrote a book. We started to host monthly nurse meetups for nurses during COVID of hundreds of nurses from around the world who would dial in and tell us their story. The organization is made up by some of the greatest nurse innovators that I've ever met. Those who want to challenge and believe that they can make the world a better place by challenging and believing that the world can be better if you give nurses a platform to allow them to innovate and be supported as opposed to being shut down. The future of nursing, the year of the nurse to me, means that we are not going to just carry on the legacy that came before us, but we are going to shatter that legacy by creating a new era of what nursing looks for, so that the next generation is so inspired by the work that we have done to not only transform healthcare, but save patients' lives, that the next generation is going to feel that if they want to be at the forefront of healthcare, they are going to want to be a nurse. And I am petrified that the current status quo, the way nursing education is delivered, the job future for nursing, if it keeps going the way that it is, the generation behind us, my own kids, my own daughter, would I tell them ever to be a nurse if they didn't have a career in front of them that elevates them, that the first day of their job doesn't look like the last day of their job 30 years later, which many people express that Groundhog's Day exists in our world of nursing. The world of nursing, our profession, our career has to fundamentally change. So with that, I think we should move to some questions, and we'll leave right, I'll find that video as you guys do that, jump on in, and that gives you sort of the highlight of where history of nursing has gone, where my own career took it, and where we sit today with SONSIEL and the conversations and nurse innovation and the future of what we hope is going to be a very different world for nursing, still facing tremendous downward pressures to make that happen. So tell me what you guys are thinking and where you want to go.
Yeah, guys, please jump in. Just turn on your mics and your video too, if you can, and go for it. Ask her a question.
Okay.
Well, to begin with, I'd like to.
Oh, you want to go for it? Go for it.
No, I find it quite surprising what you say in that, you know, nurses historically have been so uninvolved in giving their input, because they're the ones who are actually using all these processes and really being at the front line of it all. So I find that really very surprising as a business person, that you wouldn't actually have more nurses involved in innovation, because it just makes sense. You go to the end user, you know. So why?
Everybody else, it makes sense to everybody else outside of nursing. I said it makes sense to everybody outside of nursing that this happens, but I think that just the way healthcare is designed, it just never made sense the way that healthcare's hierarchy system existed, to think that nurses were the people that should have been engaged with. But yeah, keep going, Pooja.
Yeah, no, that was my question. Like, why is that so? Because for me, it's counterintuitive, you know.
And Fabio, you were a manager within a hospital system, and so you can probably speak to this equally, if not better than I can, about how the workflow happens and why in this situation. And to me, nursing is one of the only professions that and businesses that does not align with a higher corporate strategy. Like for nursing, your job is to come in and care for patients. The business of healthcare is to make money in a sense, and then so you have these managers who are trapped sort of in between the business and the application, and they don't quite align. The goals of the nurses don't quite align with the goals of the hospital. And so you have this inherent sort of butting of heads to manage that kind of system. But what do you think, Fabio?
I think that being a nurse actually makes you a great leader rather than a great manager, because you are much more caring about who you're managing rather than just looking after the money aspect of the business. And this is a thing where a lot of organizations are leaking, because they don't care about the staff, they don't care about how they feel, they don't care about if they can be innovator, if they can improve the service. All they need is generating money. And this is where I think the system has to change, especially for hospital, for organization, putting the nurse, putting the people that are in the front line in the front line even of development. That will make the difference. That will let people see the problem with different eyes, from different perspective, exactly like the CEO of the company you were mentioning that sit up with you at the Congress. Is exactly that is the message that I think we need to spread out. That is really important, because being on the manager side, I just realized how, as you say, that manager is between two fires. You have the the nurse, the doctors who come from one side, that they want to solve problems, that they need from you that expertise to listen to them, to bring that things on the table, and you're gonna promise them that you're gonna deliver that. But then on the other side, you need to report to who is above you, to say, well, we need to improve this, this, and this, and they will look at cost and they will say no. So you are in the middle of fire, and then you will be seen like the bad manager rather than. But I think that what can really make the difference is creating leaders rather than managers, where leader can let other people see through their eyes, their vision, and why that has to change. So this, I think, is even related like to the future of nursing, and is related to what you were saying in terms of career progression. Why a nurse cannot become a hospital director? Why a nurse cannot become a CEO of an organization? Everything is about studying, is about experience, is about progression, right? It's about being stimulated, even in a kind of way. And if when I enter into the profession, and I speak for experience, but mostly based in Italy, my scare, my fear of going back to Italy is that knowing the system, if I'm gonna start as a nurse, I will always be a nurse, which is not a bad thing because I love my job, but I don't have the push, the stimulant that will tell me, okay, keep progressing, keep studying, keep improving yourself, which I think is really important for everyone to get the best out of them. So I think we need to change, and we need to have much more talking about this topic because it's really important.
You're absolutely right, Fabio. I mean, nurses, I remember I had a call a couple of days ago with just a brilliant nurse by the name of Shauna Butler, and we were doing a radio program together, and she said, nurses are task managers. You're given tasks. That's what we're supposed to do. So every day we're given a list, and that's why we're not allowed to do these other things, because we're given so many tasks that people just are there for us to, hey, change the bedpan, change the beds, take the vital signs, change the wounds, give the medications. We have a list of tasks to do. We are not given that freedom to sit there and say, you have a patient in front of you. How can you transform that? You see a broken system. How can you transform that? You are given tasks until that fundamental change happens for nursing, where they're recognized for the knowledge and expertise that they have at the bedside to create so much greater value to a healthcare system by addressing the major fundamental breakage points and all the stressors. They're going to only be seen as task managers. We're only going to be seen as valuable as how quickly we can work, how many tasks we can accomplish, and how fast we can go in the course of a shift. And for that, I don't think anybody wants to feel like the only thing that they're good for is going through and checklisting tasks, that their mind makes no impact, and that their vision for the future and things are not heard. That's a fundamental failure. And you're absolutely right, Fabio, that the way that we're trained in nursing, when we're put into that job, the managers, what we see is, hey, you're there to achieve tasks. I'm not looking at what you're going to be able to do for healthcare going forward. In fact, I was just reading an article on Facebook that said, hey, if you're a new grad and you're interviewing for a job, don't tell me that you want to go back to school, because then I know you're not going to stay with me. And I actually commented, said, that's absolutely backwards, because you're telling that person, if they have dreams and aspirations like most of us in our career that start here and want to end up here, that if you're going to express at the beginning of the career, you're not the kind of nurse that we want at our hospital system, because we want only nurses who are going to stay with us 5 or 10 years and do the same job day in and day out and become better at the tasks of which they do, so that we can make that investment in you. And to me, that is a fundamental failure that we're having in our healthcare system. So I know that you guys are, we're all facing COVID. The world in which we're doing and managing things, and I want to share this with them, is SONSIEL and Beacon Street TEDx have come together, and they're putting together a documentary on nurses during the era of COVID. So if you have any nurses who want to share their story, have ever wanted to do a TEDx, this would be the opportunity to do that. So you would go to sonsiel.org, follow the directions, and upload your video. You have till the end of August to do so. And hopefully that documentary will be the first documentary really advocated and pushed on TED to expand and explore the world of what nurses face every day at the front lines in academia, but even for those who are not by the front lines, what they're experiencing during COVID and how that's impacting who they are and where they're going with their careers. So that's one thing I wanted to put out there for you guys, because my goal in life has never been about myself. Everything that we've built is about building a platform that helps elevate everybody else. We wrote a book, and the authors, the publisher called me and said, Rebecca, we want you to write a book about yourself. And I was like, how boring. Like, write a book about all these incredible nurses. So 47 nurses came together and we wrote the book, The Rebel Nurse Handbook. And it's 3 to 5 page stories of nurse innovators who challenge the status quo. The documentary on TED is all about as many nurses we possibly can put on a platform. And a hackathon is about as many nurses as possible. We had over 1,000 that just attended the one that we ran with Microsoft and Johnson & Johnson virtually a couple of weeks ago to deal with COVID-19. The nurses stand on the stage not once, not twice, but 3 times to talk about their ideas and how they can change the world. And the truth is I fundamentally believe the more that we can get nurses on the stage, the more that we can get them elevated and talking about innovation, the more that the world is going to recognize that the workforce that we need to invest in, the workforce that we need to transform is going to be nursing. Because in the future, if we don't make this investment, who is going to be by the bedside? Who is going to be left to basically manage those that are at the most desperate moment of their lives? If there is not a nurse there, who is going to be the one to save their lives? And that is something that we fundamentally want to do. Are you guys okay if I leave you with this video? If I show you this video, I think it puts us in the right one. If I share our screen?
Yeah.
Okay, somebody just needs to enable this, and I think it will leave us on a really good note for you guys. I just need to be added as a host or sharing it from there. All right, fabulous. Let's see if this, thank you guys. I think I got this. Let's hope this works. Here we go. That video always makes me choke up for everybody. But to me, that's the future of nursing. It's creating that legacy. It's creating that moment that somebody stops and captures those stories. And it was that video that J&J had to go and find and hire a person that knew the deep web to find those stories. Nobody's ever documented our history. And the truth is, it's time we do. Because it has been nurses at every critical moment across healthcare that is necessary for us to transform the future of it. So you guys, thank you so much for having me. I will turn it over to you guys. We'll go from there.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. I know you must be super busy and also waking up so early as well to join us. So if anybody has any last minute questions, you know, this is the time. You can pop in your question. Otherwise, you know, we'll say goodbye at this point. Anybody?
Last question. I will make the last question. So where do you see your organization? Just a quick one. Where is your organization actually going? What is your dream? What is your vision?
That is a great question. And we had our board meeting just yesterday. Oh my gosh. And they were talking all about our strategic mission and vision. And the goal in our future is that the mission and the vision of SONSIEL is that in the future, the world will always look for a nurse when they are transforming healthcare, and that we will elevate, and that we will no longer look at ourselves as a profession and say, I'm just a nurse. And that we will look at our profession to say, every nurse has the ability to innovate, drive, and transform healthcare. But the world will look at nurses and say, that is the profession that I've always needed to lead healthcare. And that's our goal. So in the next 3 years, we hope to have global membership. We do have a member in the UK by the name of Bongi Shabandi. She is one of the leading nurse practitioners in the world, who's actually building the first nurse practitioner program across Africa. She's wonderful. And then we also, we're opening up our Canadian, we were supposed to kick off our Canadian Open this year in April with when COVID hit, so we didn't expand, but we have Mary Lou Ackerman, who's one of the leading nurse scientists and innovators in the world, who leads our Canadian force from there. So I hope you guys all join us. It's really all about the future. And as far as I've always said to my board, we also are an affiliate member to the United Nations, so we're putting nurses on committees at the UN. That happened very quickly for us. But I've always said, I don't care where you come from, what your degree is, and what thing is. I'm looking for those who are going to make an impact. And if you show up and you want to make an impact, you can go ahead and show up at the UN. You can stand on the stage at the hackathon. You can join any committee that you want. Because the truth is, I'm not looking for those who have degrees. I'm looking for those who are going to change the future of healthcare. And that's what we're about. So thank you guys so much for having me today.
Thank you. Virtual clap. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
You guys, I look forward to connecting with you offline. And anybody connect with me on LinkedIn, you guys, and I look forward to hearing from you. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Well done, guys. Speak to you later.